Welcome to Grief for the Death and Demise of All Americans. Media is lying to the American people. If you want to know the truth and you want independent media, media is sponsored by the viewers. The mainstream media is sponsored by multinational corporations. Multinational corporations that are responsible for global warming. Multinational corporations that are responsible for GMOs. Multinational corporations that are responsible for polluting our air and our water. If you want free speech television on our cable network so the whole community is informed, so the whole community can take action, then you want free speech television on Comcast. Please call WAND at 217-424-6075 and ask for free speech television to be aired on one of their sub-channels. Or you can call Sarah Gitchell. Call Comcast headquarters and ask Sarah and tell Sarah if she doesn't cover free speech television on Comcast, you're going to switch to satellite TV. The number for Comcast headquarters is 215-286-1700. That's 215-286-1700. If you have satellite TV, you've already got free speech television. It's DishNet, channel 9415, or DirecTV, channel 348. Also, free speech television live streams online.
So you might be surprised to learn that Saudi Arabia recently gained a seat on the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. Yeah, a country where male guardianship requires that women get permission to do everything, from receive an education to travel, a country where women still can't drive or leave the house without proper head-to-toe covering, and when they do, everything is gender segregated. That, Saudi Arabia, was given a 3-year term as a member of the UN agency whose sole mission is to promote gender equality and women's rights. Take a moment with that. Hillel Neuer, executive director of UN Watch, a nonprofit that tries to keep the international body accountable, called the move absurd and morally reprehensible. Absurd as it may be, and it's fucking ridiculous, what's even more absurd is that the appointment is not a sign that something is wrong at the UN. It's kind of business as usual. In reality, the UN has far more to do with maintaining the status quo of global capitalism than it does with promoting human rights or peace and prosperity. While this alliance has existed for decades, this new old news is more vital amid growing global instability and the increasing influence of the far right on the U.S. and other world governments that pay the UN's budget.
In his first foreign trip abroad as president, Donald Trump traveled to Saudi Arabia this weekend, where he signed an arms deal totaling $110 billion. This comes in addition to the more than $115 billion offered in arms deals to Saudi Arabia by President Obama during his time in office. Vanderbilt University law professor Michael Newton wrote, quote, "Continued sale of arms to Saudi Arabia, and specifically of arms used in airstrikes, should not be presumed to be permissible," unquote. To talk more about the significance of Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia, we go now to Washington, D.C. to talk to Medea Benjamin, co-founder of Code Pink.
It's just appalling to see Trump in Saudi Arabia, Amy, touting this $110 billion arms deal when you look at the history of how those arms have been used. You talked about their use in devastating Yemen. We also have the example of them crushing the democratic uprising in neighboring Bahrain, using those weapons to fund al-Qaeda groups in Iraq and in Syria, and using those weapons internally to crush dissent, particularly in the Shia areas, which is happening right now with the Saudi siege of the Shia town of Awamiya that is getting absolutely no press in the United States. So Congress does have the right, and I would say the obligation, to stop these arms deals. It didn't do it under Obama. It's time they do it under Trump. They'll only do it if we, the people, put pressure on Congress to say no weapons sales to the repressive regime of Saudi Arabia.
And the fact that these precision-guided weapons that President Obama, under enormous pressure from peace activists and others for selling this to Saudi Arabia, finally stopped. The fact that Trump has resumed these weapons.
Yes, he's resumed those weapons. Again, Congress could stop it. And he also will probably be giving the green light for the invasion of the port of Hodeidah, which is where the majority of humanitarian aid comes in. The humanitarian community says that will be catastrophic. So I think, once again, we have to put the pressure on Congress to say no green light for the invasion of that port. And in fact, what we do need is an emphasis on going back to the negotiating table, find a political solution to this crisis in Yemen, which is the furthest thing from what President Trump wants to do, because you could see from his trip to Saudi Arabia that this is all about encircling Iran. This is all about inflaming even further sectarian violence, which is what the U.S. has been doing by supporting the Saudi involvement in Yemen.
Why would the invasion of Hodeidah be catastrophic, as you say?
Because this is where the food comes in. 90% of the food in Yemen is imported. If they cannot get food into Hodeidah, which has already been hampered by the Saudi bombing of the cranes there and by a Saudi blockade of vessels coming in, but if they further destroy the ability to bring humanitarian aid into Hodeidah, it will result in a full-blown famine. And
cholera, the issue of cholera. Hundreds of Yemenis have now died because of the devastation of the sanitation system.
Half of the medical facilities in Yemen have been destroyed. Again, in the significant, most of them by the Saudi bombing campaign. You have now an outbreak of cholera that is declared a national catastrophe in Yemen, where they're saying that now 1 out of every 10 minutes a Yemeni is dying from the effects of cholera.
Why do you think President Trump went to Saudi Arabia first, the first country in the world, his first foreign trip? Most presidents since Reagan have visited either Canada or Mexico as their first foreign trip.
Well, first, Amy, think of all the protests that would have broken out in Canada and Mexico with Trump's appearance. You didn't see one protester on the streets of Saudi Arabia because protesters would be arrested, flogged, beaten, tortured, and perhaps beheaded. So it was a, quote, friendly place for Donald Trump in that respect. He also wants to tout the weapons sales, and he talks about it in terms of jobs, jobs, jobs back in the United States. And he wants to, between the trip to Saudi Arabia and the trip to Israel, be sending this very clear message to Iran. And let's be clear, the best foreign policy achievement of the Obama administration was the nuclear deal with Iran. This is something that Trump may well destroy.
Medea Benjamin, the issue of human rights in Saudi Arabia.
It was quite ironic when Rex Tillerson was speaking at a press conference with the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia right next to him and said that he hopes the people of Iran get the freedoms of speech and association they deserve. And a reporter said, what about Saudi Arabia? He wouldn't answer that question. So the selectivity is just astounding. I think going to a country like Saudi Arabia that has no free speech, no free association, no national elections, no political parties, no trade unions, where people like Raif Badawi, the blogger, is in prison for 10 years for blogging, where human rights lawyers are in prison for 15 years for defending human rights. It is appalling that Trump would go to Saudi Arabia and not even mention the issue of human rights, much less try to meet with one of the advocates for human rights while he was visiting Saudi Arabia.
I wanted to go back to some of the comments Trump made about Saudi Arabia during his campaign, when he frequently denounced Saudi Arabia. In a Facebook post on June 16th, 2016, he wrote, quote, "Saudi Arabia and many of the countries that gave vast amounts of money to the Clinton Foundation want women as slaves and to kill gays. Hillary must return all money from such countries." In an interview with the New York Times last year, Trump also claimed that without U.S. support and protection, quote, Saudi Arabia wouldn't exist for very long. During a February 2016 interview with Fox and Friends, Trump accused Saudi Arabia of being behind the 9/11 attacks.
Who blew up the World Trade Center? It wasn't the Iraqis. It was Saudi. Take a look at Saudi Arabia. Open the documents. We ought to get Bush or somebody to have the documents opened because, frankly, if you open the documents, I think you're going to see that it was Saudi Arabia.
That was Trump speaking in February last year on Fox and Friends. Medea Benjamin.
He said a lot of truthful things during the campaign that now he goes back on as soon as he is president. It is quite astounding to see him in Saudi Arabia, the very country that is behind the 9/11 attacks, 15 of the 19 hijackers, that is still trying behind the scenes to stop the ability of 9/11 families to sue Saudi Arabia in U.S. courts. In fact, has blackmailed the U.S., saying that it would pull out $750 billion of investments. And meanwhile, Donald Trump is trying to get them to invest more in the U.S. economy so they can continue to blackmail us.
And I wanted to go to another comment he made, going back to Donald Trump on the campaign trail at a presidential debate in October, accusing Clinton Foundation of being a criminal enterprise for taking millions of dollars from Saudi Arabia and other countries.
It's a criminal enterprise. Saudi Arabia giving $25 million, Qatar, all of these countries. You talk about women and women's rights. So these are people that push gays off buildings. These are people that kill women and treat women horribly, and yet you take their money. So I'd like to ask you right now, why don't you give back the money that you've taken from certain countries that treat certain groups of people so horribly? Why don't you give back the money?
So that was Donald Trump in October in a debate with Hillary Clinton. Well, in another deal reached over the weekend, the Saudi Kingdom and the United Arab Emirates announced they would give $100 million to Ivanka Trump's proposed Women Entrepreneurs Fund. Medea.
It's the height of hypocrisy. If the Saudis indeed wanted to help women entrepreneurs, they should lift the guardianship system that treats women as minors their entire life. They should allow women to drive. They should stop the gender segregation that exists at every level of Saudi society, from the schools to the business places to places of worship. And to have Ivanka Trump meeting with Saudi women entrepreneurs and touting this new investment is absolutely ridiculous. Ivanka Trump could have met with the women who have been signing petitions asking for lifting of that guardianship system. She could have been meeting with the women who have been punished for trying to drive. Those would be good ways to help women entrepreneurs in Saudi Arabia.
Interesting. Neither Ivanka Trump nor Melania Trump, the First Lady, were covered at the events and when Donald Trump spoke.
Well, it's also interesting that they were the only women at the events. You looked out and you saw just a sea of men. And so I think there are so many things that Ivanka or Melania could have done, could have said, that would show solidarity with the Saudi women who are fighting and have been fighting for decades for their rights. And yet they didn't utter a word of support for those women.
Medea, what role did Donald Trump's son-in-law, Ivanka Trump's husband, Jared Kushner, play in making the arms deal happen?
Right before Donald Trump's trip, the son-in-law, Jared Kushner, was meeting with the Saudis to clinch this deal. And in fact, in what was described as a jaw-dropping moment, he picked up the phone to call the head of Lockheed Martin to negotiate a better deal for the Saudis. You wonder why the representative of the United States is trying to get a better deal for the Saudis instead of the other way around. But he made sure that deal would be ready by the time Donald Trump got there to announce the $110 billion deal.
And Medea, I want to ask you to stay with us. Medea Benjamin, co-founder of the peace group Code Pink, author of the book Kingdom of the Unjust, Behind the U.S.-Saudi Connection.
Well, black on man, when they shot the man, he said, peace lasts forever. And in my first memories, they shot Kennedy. And I went numb when I learned to see. So I never fell for Vietnam. We got the wall at the sea to remind us all. You can't trust freedom when it's not in your hands. When everybody's fighting for their promised land. I don't need your civil war. It needs to reach all it bears the ball. Your power is never something in a human country, no, it ain't that grand. I don't need your civil war.
Medea, in your opinion, why did Saudi Arabia give so much money to the Clinton Foundation?
Well, because the Clintons have a lot of influence and the Saudis like to buy influence. So they give money to the John McCain Foundation because he's the head of the Armed Services Committee. They give money to the Clinton Foundation because she is going to be the next president, and she was the Secretary of State, and she's very influential. So the Saudis have been very brilliant the way they've been buying influence. And it's quite ironic when you see these cables where Hillary Clinton says, what are we going to do? The Saudis are funding all these extremist groups. And yet as Secretary of State, she could have sanctioned them. She could have stopped weapons sales. She could have really done something significant. Instead, she gets money for her foundation. This woman was just going to say.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just, I just wanted to know, because I, as someone that doesn't work in this realm at all, I actually am a social worker in a small community. So what can I, in your opinion, what are some things I could do to be of any kind of assistance with this mess?
Yeah. Well, we ask people to, I have some flyers I'll pull out, but to contact their congresspeople. And this is not an issue of left or right, because some people say, I got a right-wing congressperson, they're not going to do anything. You know, sometimes it's the most conservative ones who say, why are we supporting this repressive regime? Since there were 42 weapons deals, there's going to be more weapons deals. And with the new administration, it's a time to say, all right, Congress, do your duty. Don't just rubber stamp these. Actually look at what it's going for. And if in the case of Yemen, it's been said by the United Nations that there's are probable war crimes being committed when the Saudis are using our weapons to hit Doctors Without Borders hospitals and schools and residential neighborhoods and killing thousands of civilians and causing a cholera outbreak because the water system has been destroyed. That this is blood on our hands, which is something that Senator Chris Murphy has said, that the Yemenis see it as a U.S. war. It's going to, whether or not you care about the poor Yemeni people, it's going to blow back against us. And so we want to build on this beginning of a congressional criticism and votes to stop the weapons sales.
So if we shut them off from our supply, there's everyone else out there more than willing to supply, and that's a real problem because it isn't the weapon, it is the government.
Well, the arms experts have come out and done some really good studies saying that it would be nearly impossible for the Saudis to switch over. They've had decades of buying Western equipment, and they come with contracts for maintenance that span 2 decades, and the Russians and equipment is totally different, as is the Chinese equipment. And there are stronger movements than in the U.S. that are in France, Germany, the UK, Canada, and Sweden that have all been selling weapons to the Saudis, and their citizens are pushing harder than we are, and there's a halt in a number of the weapons sales. The European Parliament has said there should be no weapons sales to the Saudis as long as they continue to use them in an abusive fashion. So we're not the only ones doing this. We're actually far behind many of the others in the Western world.
I think for the business of arms manufacture, it comes back to McNamara in a lot of ways. But given the largesse of our military, which was proud of, if we were of a mind to put an embargo on weapons in the Middle East, we got the power to do it. We just aren't going to do it. Because now every congressman's going to have a manufacturing plant in his backyard. This is going to cost us jobs.
Well, and also if you look at job creation, there's great university studies that have been shown that the military is the worst in terms of job creation. So you put $1 billion in the military, you get 11,700 jobs approximately. You put it into infrastructure, green jobs, education, healthcare, any of those, and you get a lot more jobs. It's just that the weapons industries are very powerful, and they have their own lobbies, and their lobbies give money to the congresspeople, and it really is an example of how corrupt our system is, that we allow this military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about back in the 50s to really run our foreign policy. And this is the epitome of it when you see that the majority of these weapons are going to the most responsible country for the spread of extremism. And what more can that tell you?
Do you think that in America we care less as a country about this stuff? Like, are other first world countries that are like supposedly similar to us doing more about this and cracking down more, and we're the ones that are just taking the money and not caring and just kind of talking about other things, and this isn't getting challenged? Is that kind of...
Other countries, they have better press than we do, so they are better educated. There are more, there are stronger civil society type groups, and in the case of Saudis, for example, there are a lot of Saudis living in Europe who have fled the country, and so they've started organizations and they educate people. But in the U.S., I think we tend not to, they have now 10 lobby groups in Washington, D.C. that are now not only focusing on D.C., they've hired new groups to focus on the states and get governors and people to speak out and say, there was a recent law that was passed saying 9/11 families could sue Saudi Arabia in U.S. courts to see how far up the chain it went around 9/11. The Saudis do not like that at all, so they've hired people now to get the governors and the states to say, this is bad for our economic relationship, we rely on the Saudis. So I think they've put a lot of money into buying friends in the United States. So between a media that doesn't cover these issues, less active civil society in this country, and the money that's been put into the PR, you add that all together, and basically it's kind of interesting because there is so much Islamophobia in this country, and yet, on the other hand, it doesn't translate into Islamophobia against the ones who we should be questioning. It's the poor, victims of the Syrian war, or the poor women who have nothing to do with it. They want to get out every last drop of oil that they have, and right now their strategy is to flood the market with cheap oil, wipe out their competitors, and then reap the benefits when the prices go back up. And certainly they have been manipulating the markets over the years, and have been very smart about it with the help of Western companies that are also reaping the benefits from this because they work inside Saudi Arabia and very close to the Saudis.
Yeah, when I traveled on this lot of friends, one day one of them made the remark, said, you know why they fight all the time? There's no why. He said, because they like it.
Well, I think we fight all the time. You know, I think our government is the biggest purveyor of violence. We were born on genocide, built on slavery, and continue to invade other people's countries all the time. So, and one of the things many Saudis that, as I go around and talk, have said, also mention, which does come up in the book, how the CIA has been working with the Saudi regime to do its dirty work. When it doesn't want to come to the American public, certainly not to Congress, but needs money. Yeah, they go to the Saudis and they say, give us $30 million. You know, we want to start up a rebel group in this country. Or during the Iran-Contra deal, they went to the Saudis to fund it, to fund the Mujahideen originally to overthrow the Soviets in Afghanistan. They went to the Saudis. How did that work out? Well, how did it work out when that turned into Al-Qaeda? And how did the invasion of Iraq work out when it turned into ISIS? So, yes. A lot of unfortunate involvement between the U.S. and the Saudis that have turned into the Frankenstein children that we helped create.
You're still funding them?
It's hard to trace.
Okay.
In 2014, there were cables that said, Clinton cables, saying the Saudis are funding ISIS. The U.S. has gone to the Saudis and say you have to clamp down, and they have tried to cut off some of the charities that were very obviously sending the money to ISIS. But it's very hard to trace, and it's hard to really clamp down when even the princes and the king who might want to stop it don't have the ability to totally clamp down on the very powerful clerics, because then those clerics will come back and the blowback will be against them. And in fact, other cables came out in the U.S. that said the Saudis were refusing to cooperate with us on counterintelligence around Al-Qaeda and ISIS until they started blowing up things inside Saudi Arabia. And that's the only time that the Saudis agreed to work together.
What kind of work does Code Pink do?
So Code Pink is a group that started after 9/11 saying, go after the individuals who attacked us. Don't use this as an excuse to invade countries like Iraq. It had nothing to do with 9/11. And we were a women-led group, encouraging men to join, but wanting female voices to be kind of at the forefront. And we've been working ever since to try to get the U.S. to use diplomacy and political solutions. We were very involved in working for the Iran nuclear deal that we feel has been the most positive foreign policy achievement of the Obama administration. And we feel like it's those kind of things that keep us out of new wars and that are the only ways to solve the disastrous situations in Iraq and Syria and Libya right now, and that the U.S. should be much more focused on being a peacemaker instead of an arms dealer.
There's a saying, evil prevails when good men do nothing. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to call this number. Call Schnooks and let them know you will not shop at their store if they tear down the Sacred Heart Griffin Woods, the last woods in Springfield. And you baby fairies, look at your show, baby, coming over to this purse. Ooh. There's Sunday, and there's Monday, there's Tuesday, and there's Wednesday, there's Thursday, and there's Friday, and then there's Saturday. Days of the week. Days of the week. Days of the week. You're driving yellow, you're driving yellow.